And welcome to another edition of The Natural Nurse and Dr. Z. I'm Dr. Z, and we're really glad that you can learn about health, wellness, and alternative medicine today on our wonderful program. So we're really excited. Remember, you can always get information about what we're doing. Myself, Dr. Z, Dr. Eugene Zampro, naturopathic physician and herbalist at Dr. Z Naturally, and of course, thenaturalnurse.com. Well, without further ado, we're going to bring on our guest. We're really excited to talk about all things fats. You know, the topic is turn up the flavor, dial down the rage with health educator Stuart Tomc sharing his nutritional tips revolving around fats. Stuart is a distinguished health educator and certified natural health professional boosting over 25 years of expertise in nutritional medicine. Renowned as an authority on evidence-based supplements, particularly, he has significantly contributed to the global understanding of omega-3 oils through his work for Nordic Naturals. And his expertise involves serving to the World Health Organization and advising integrative physicians worldwide. And we were just sharing to see if our paths crossed. I was the founder of the University of Bridgeport College of Naturopathic Medicine and on its faculty emeritus for 25 years. But I don't think I ever ran into Stuart, but I'm running into him today. Hey, how are you, Stuart?
I'm very well, Dr. Z. It's just an honor to be on your show with you today.
Thank you so much. Well, it's so fats are like, I think they're some of the most misunderstood things around as far as people hear the buzzwords, fats good, fats bad, fats are, there's, all kinds of information about cooking with fats and what oil should you use over your salad and should you use coconut or flaxseed or flaxseed's bad or should you use canola? I mean, it just goes on and on, Stuart. So I want to review some basic chemistry about oils, fats, and different types of fats out there. Just lay the ground for us out there.
Well, thank you, Dr. Z. Yes, it is confusing. I call it the big fat story. What do I mean by that? I've learned from some of the top omega-3 scientists that our government has had a protein-based food policy. And what they mean by that is most of our children are taller than we are. And to your point, Doc, when it comes to fat, I've learned from some of the top omega-3 specialists that everyone's confused when it comes to fats. And when it comes to the government and public health officials, the only thing that they really agree on are that trans fatty acids are bad. But other than that, there's still a giant debate, to your point, butter, no butter, coconut fat, no coconut fat, polyunsaturated fats, while the seed oils are getting killed right now in the media. So that's why I was excited to be on your show to unpack this. One of my great mentors used to say this about fats. You'll love this, Doc. Dr. Piamelli, if you've ever heard of Daniele Piamelli, really a titan in the lipid space. He says in his beautiful Italian accent, lipids are sticky, and scientists don't always like sticky.
I love it. Yeah. I'm Italian. My dad's from Venice, so.
Okay, so you'd appreciate this. He's making
Oh
a
yeah, I've been there. And they use a lot of fats, but they're sort of fats are like the mainstream of the Mediterranean diet. So tell us a little bit about the types of fats that should be in your diet.
Well, we need a mixture of all types of fats, but there are some that our bodies make and some that our bodies don't make. And I think that's an easy point of differentiation, Dr. Z, for people that are just getting comfortable with these sticky lipids that are confusing. Your body makes saturated fat, so you don't really need to eat saturated fat. Your body makes it. Your body makes oleic acid. What's that? That's the one that's in olive oil. In fact, the most abundant fatty acid in the human brain is omega-9. Your body makes that. So if those are fats that we make saturated fats. They give our cell membranes some structure. If we make oleic acid, omega-9, the most abundant fatty acid in the brain, then that's good, but does that mean we need to eat more of that fat? The reality is that there are only two fats that are considered EFAs, essential fatty acids. And I know you know this because you taught this in the school, but a lot of the listeners might not know this, that these two essential fatty acids, the EFAs, omega-6 and omega-3, do very powerful and opposing things. They're both important, right, doctor? That's where I think some people get confused. If they are essential, meaning the body doesn't make them, we need to get omega-6 from our diet, and it's largely pro-inflammatory. This isn't bad. We have to have inflammation. Omega-3 that is essential that we have to get from our diet is largely anti-inflammatory. And I think that that's where people get confused. Doc, what I've noticed over my career, and my professor used to say this, people demonize the fats. They say this one is good and this one is bad. Here's what Dr. Lands said, William E. Lands. He's the expert on omega-6-3 balance. He used to say this, my professor, omega-6 is only toxic to the degree that it exceeds omega-3 in the tissue, which is the issue.
Right. Oh, I like that. With the tissue, which is the issue. Good, good.
It was
That's a
so
new
beautiful because when
aphorism.
you listen closely, people are like, did you say omega-6 was bad, man? No.
No.
Omega-6 is
It's like
only,
gold, it's all I always call it like Goldilocks. It's,
it is.
it has to be just right, the balance.
And I love that you say that because let's just use an analogy everyone gets. We cut our finger, the blood clots, it hurts. This is good. Don't do it. Blood clotting, that's all omega-6 actions, right? Without me having to get, deep into the weeds. We talked before we went live about the eicosanoids, right? And all the other specialized
I might not let you escape too
Oh,
easily.
no, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. I'm just saying, I want to ease into it a little bit for people,
Yeah.
right? The idea that if
Okay.
you cut yourself and you don't have omega-6, you don't clot your blood as easily, it doesn't hurt. That's a sign not to do that. But to your point, it's fine tuning. After the blood has clotted, after we've created the pain signals, well, then the body starts to begin the process of resolution of inflammation. And I think what people fail to appreciate, omega-6 will turn it on, omega-3 turns it down, but it's the compounds that omega-3s make that resolve, primarily. There's some omega-6s, species, and some compounds that are resolution, but it's such fine tuning to your point. And that's where it's the balance, it's the Goldilocks. And you know what? That might change at different times of human development. For
Well,
example,
that's a good point. I was going to say, for example, I'll probably beat you to it. Throughout history, we've had ancient history. We were probably more hunter-gatherers, and we kind of ate things that grazed on grass. I always found it fascinating, like just studying with Dr. Bill Mitchell, the late great naturopathic mind, when he would lecture about omega-3s. What a great lecture that always was, a series of lectures. And he would always say that, yeah, you want to really eat things that ate grass because that kind of gives, and people think, wow, grass has oils in it, but yeah, it does. Green things have these good omega-3s that get part of the animal's body, and whether you're drinking the milk or you're eating the particular meats or whatnot, yeah, you're getting those oils, assuming you're absorbing it, which we could talk a little bit about absorption of fat at some point, but yeah, so go ahead with your thinking on that.
no, I love you saying that because Professor Michael Crawford, who wrote The Driving Force, that should be a must-read book, I think, for people. He
Hmm.
said it many years ago, to your point, doctor, the omega-3s come from the greens, the animals that eat them, the algae, or the fish that eat the algae. That's where the omega-3s come from. The omega-6s come from the seeds and the nuts and the grains and the animals that eat them.
Mhm.
Just that bifurcation. Omega 3s are where the greens, nature put the greens, right? The omega 3s and the greens, the omega 6s and the seeds.
Mhm.
I think that is, and then what I also meant was at different times of life, not just throughout history, but when you're an infant, for example, and your brain is growing, you are actually accreting more omega 6 to make up a very important part of the brain. So you might see higher levels of omega 3 in children as the brain is developing. And then when they develop into adults, you're going to see lower levels. But to your point, back in history, before we had all of this ultra processed food, it's been predicted, and they didn't have tests, so it's a medical hypothesis, right, doctor? That the average human in 1850 would have had a balance between omega 6 and omega 3. What does that mean? They would have an adequate amount of the omega 6 to turn on the immune system. This is an obligatory immune response. But they would also have an adequate amount of omega 3 to help turn down and resolve the immune system. And I think that that's where people can really learn from how far out of balance. You see, seed oil, for example, soybean oils increased 1,000 fold from 1909 to 1999. Did you know it was that big of an increase, Doc?
I knew it was huge, but that's amazing.
And so it's 12% of the daily caloric energy today comes from soybean oil for the average person. Now, we used to think that all that soybean oil would drive the pro-inflammatory arachidonic acid. We got to use a couple of technical terms here. Not all these omega 3s are the same. But you know what we found out recently? And this is a paradox. It's not just that it's driving arachidonic acid, because it isn't in all cases. It's genetic.
Mm.
Some people can drink soybean oil out of the bottle, no problem.
Mhm.
Other people, when they get all that seed oil in their diet, that drives into the inflammatory AA. And where do we see this? Higher rates in people of color, genetically,
Mm.
with metabolic derangement, type 2 diabetes, obesity, heart disease. Why? That soybean oil is flooding into the pro-inflammatory arachidonic acid. Are you seeing why this is so interesting?
Yeah, so let's just backtrack about that because I think that's really important. First of all, what you said, but let's just even go even further basics about. So all this is basically happening in your cell membrane, for instance. Like, so tell us a little bit about how the cell membrane is aligned with, hydrophilic and hydrophobic tails and how the fats get in there, and then how that can, if some of those things are catalyzed with different enzymes, phospholipase, for instance, then that creates this whole cascade of events that you mentioned.
Oh, I just love being here on your show, Doc. Thank you for nailing it like that. So if you look at the cross section of a cell membrane, that's where all these fatty acids are. So just remember high school biology. It looks like jellyfish with their tails coming down, and then jellyfish at the bottom with their tails going up. And we've got this fat-loving, water-aversive, fat-aversive, water-loving, this, and all these cell membranes will self-assemble irrespective of what fats are available. That's incredible to me. So if you're eating Pam and Spam and Ding Dongs and chicken nuggets and Hoes and Krispy Kremes, your cell membranes, they don't care at all. They're just going to be born, the red blood cells are then born into a more hostile environment. What do I mean? Think of a kid coming home with two parents that are fighting. There's not enough food. The house is dirty. That kid gets scarred for life. If a red blood cell is a loved child, as an analogy, comes home, two parents or two caregivers, lots of food, right, safe environment, then that child develops very nicely. The same thing with red blood cells, because the environment ultimately dictates the biology. So as the red blood cell is being made of whatever lipids are available, let's say you're not eating 200 pounds of seafood per person per year. What does your cell membrane look like? Well, by default, if you don't have enough of the highly unsaturated fats, you have more saturated fats. And where do those saturated fats come from? Your body makes them. So we make stearic and palmitic acid and oleic acid, and these are all fatty acids that we make. But if you're deficient in the ones we need to get from our diet, That cell membrane by default is thick and sticky and rigid. The nutrients don't get in as easily. There's too many cholesterol crystals. There's too many saturated fats. Cell to cell signaling is a fraction of what it can be. And then to your eloquent point, when the enzyme, which my professor said was very promiscuous, phospholipase A2 doesn't care who's there, right? Whoever's in that cell membrane, just to be technical in the second position, this enzyme comes in, liberates these fatty acids, and whatever fatty acids you have kind of sets the stage for your inflammatory response. If you have more omega-6s, the kind from meat, the arachidonic acid, that stuff gets liberated, goes through cyclooxygenase and lipoxygenase, and produces compounds that thicken your blood and increase sensitivity to pain. However, the story is exciting because that same enzyme will release omega-3, which will go to the exact same enzyme system and make the countervalence compounds. What do? Well, if the omega-6 thickens the blood, the omega-3 thins the blood. If the omega-6 increases sensitivity to pain, the omega-3s decrease sensitivity to pain. I love what you said about Goldilocks. It's fine tuning. And
Yeah, it's like a yin. When you just said that, of course, practicing martial arts and Chinese medicine for many years, I was just thinking like yin yang balance.
that's what it is
Totally.
with a knob right there. So when somebody says this is good and this is bad, my professor used to be like, just stop it.
Yeah,
Omega
it
6
just
is
is.
only toxic to the degree that it exceeds omega 3 in the tissue hufa. So if you're not testing, is my point, which is the future of lipids. And if we think of the lipid panel, if we've got LDL, HDL, triglycerides, LP little a, why won't we? Let me ask you, you're a doctor. Why wouldn't we have omega 6 and omega 3 on the standard blood panel? Why won't we eventually have that on the standard lipid panel? What do you think about that?
Well, I think at this point it's a specialty test that has to be done. Unfortunately, there's many tests that we look at for inflammation of the cardiac system. This is Heart Month, I believe. So, this is very critical for this. But what you're talking about is kind of beyond lipids and heart disease, and this is like cell health. And Dr. Kamai always says it's not just the health of yourselves, it's the health of yourselves, which I
Oh,
love.
well
It's
done.
great because that's what the old time naturopaths talked about. They said there's really only one disease, and that's a disease of the cell not working. And we just did a show on naturopathic philosophy. Of course, there's many, thousands and thousands of diseases, but when you get down to the basics of cell membrane, how that works, mitochondria, how that works. Like you mentioned, the way that whether the cell membrane is pliable or not. Like maybe you could talk about trans versus cis fats and how that plays a role. The rigidity of a membrane, that trickles down to health issues. Now that should be standard of care to run those things. I think we will see that eventually. Homocysteine is the next cholesterol. Like homocysteine, I've been running that for 20 years on patients. Now finally, some of the mainstream labs have this. It's called cardiac IQ, where they're looking at some of these Your doctor now is wants to know more than just your cholesterol. He wants or she wants to know about your inflammation. Thinking of the brochure that I'm reading from the mainstream labs. So they are catching on that it's not alternative anymore. It's just good medicine. So yes, that's what I think about. Should checking your omega 3s and 6s be part of standard of care? Absolutely.
It's so great to hear that. It is happening. And you're right, we're going further upstream. I think that's sometimes what confuses listeners. Everybody hears inflammation and they think anti-inflammation and let's have less inflammation. Again, I think that's dramatically oversimplified. What Dr. Z and I are talking about is a modifiable risk factor because you can change the ratio of lipids in the cell membrane easily based on dietary changes. And then to Dr. Z's point, the downstream effects of having too many omega-6s and not enough omega-3s, which is where most Americans find themselves, every time their immune system is challenged, you have too many of the omega-6s, meaning that the immune system robustly turns on, which is good. However, in the absence of enough omega-3, it's not capable to turn down and resolve as effectively. What does that mean? The compounding interest of that lack of resolution of inflammation, my professor used to teach this, adds up. Every time you eat, there's an immune inflammatory response, right, Doc?
Yeah, well, let's talk about some symptoms that people would have if they had an omega-3 to 6 imbalance. Like typically, I could tell you what typically comes in the office, but what have you seen in the literature about someone that is deficient in omega-3? What would they look like? And I know it's a myriad of symptoms, but go for it.
Okay, well, just to be fair, I first want to deal with omega-6 deficiency, which is rare, right? But
It's much
omega-6,
rare, yeah.
it's
Hmm.
much rare, but omega-6 deficiency really presents itself as dry, itchy, flaky skin. It's one of the telltale signs. It's pretty rare, but you could have some people that are omega-6 deficient. Omega-3 deficiency is a little bit more difficult to spot. And here's the reason why. The measurement in the red blood cell, not the plasma, the measurement in the red blood cell of the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 is now being considered a proxy for systemic inflammation. Instead of measuring all of the inflammatory biomarkers that we have been measuring, there are many scientists that are saying if you go all the way back to the red blood cell and you measure the ratio of arachidonic acid to EPA, we call this the balance score, because these are the two major bioactive fatty acids. One is turning the immune system on, one is turning it down. That ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 is being looked at as the most important number for health and longevity that you don't know that you will know. Why? If you have 25 times, that's the average in America, of omega-6 than omega-3, every time your immune system is turned on, it has a difficult time turning down. It doesn't resolve as easily. So if you're dealing with chronic systemic inflammation, any inflammatory milieu, and you've got way more omega-6 than omega-3, you want to turn that down, get those back into balance because it's a modifiable risk factor. So we're talking every and any inflammatory condition, the patient will do better in an environment where their fatty acids are balanced, where they're testing and not guessing.
And oftentimes there are people that live on non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs because they kind of work to block these fat-derived
Yes, they do.
inflammatory things. And so one of the things I ask on my questionnaire is, if you do take these things, do they help your aches and pains? Oh yeah, I live on Tylenol, doc, or I live on acetaminophen, or I have to take this thing all the time. Okay, well so I'm first of all, that's not great, but second of all, I think clinically, this person maybe has an imbalance in omega-6s and 3s. That's the clinical thing. Let's test them.
Yeah, that's the most obvious thing. I'm so happy to hear you say that. Not every doctor understands this the way that you do, so it's such a joy to talk to you about this. Dr. Z is right. All the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, including Vioxx that was taken off the market, acetaminophen is different, obviously, that works in a different pathway, but Advil and even aspirin, all they
Mhm.
do is blunt the effects of too much omega-6. That's why
Yeah,
they
block the
temporarily,
effects of your diet and lifestyle, which is fascinating.
right, which is leading to too much omega-6, your diet and life. Because it's not just that you're eating too much omega-6, it's that you're not eating omega-3.
Mm.
And everybody wants to focus on, oh, the seed oils are bad. They're crowding everything out. Yeah, they're crowding everything out of your plate. Right? That's it. Because if you actually
Good, I
did
like
eat
that.
200 pounds of seafood per person per year, like they do in Japan,
Mm.
the laboratory that I'm working with that's in Norway, that's an independent third-party testing laboratory, has nothing to do with the company. We've been testing people all over the world, 1.5 million people, and we're seeing some interesting things. For example, in Japan, the average person has a much better omega-6-3 ratio, but guess what? They're still not in balance.
Oh, wow.
It's still 7-to-1 is the average. 7 parts omega-6, 1 part omega-3 is the average. In India, it's 35 parts omega-6 to 1 part omega-3. Why? A lot of vegetarians, a lot of fried food. Here in America, the average is 25-to-1, 25 parts omega-6 to 1 part omega-3. Why here? Largely because we eat so much meat.
And it's not grass-fed.
Yes, to your point, grass-fed meat has way more omega-3, just like you said at the top of the show. Like a farm-raised fish has
Or
lower
bison, or
omega-6.
for those that, don't want to become vegans, that's, that's a whole discussion in of itself, a whole
Oh
show
no,
in
it's
itself.
worth having. I've tested a bunch of carnivores recently with the omega-6-3 test. If they were eating grain-fed meat, they were out of balance. The
Yeah,
ones that were eating grass-fed meat were closer to being in balance. I've
right.
tested vegans that had 160 parts omega-6 to 1 part omega-3.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could be a vegan and eat soy. You could be a junkie vegan or a really, a knowledgeable one who understands the omega-3 to 6 ratio. Now, how do the oils impact other things besides aches and pains and inflammation, like the brain? I know you talked a little bit about in some of your questions forwarded before the program about mood and other brain functions. And of course, we're living in a unfortunate society that's heading towards so much more brain inflammation and dementia. It's just unbelievable. So why don't you comment on that?
Yeah, well, it was predicted almost 20 years ago that brain disorders would outrank cancer as the second leading cause of disability and disease. It's happening. There was a consensus statement. This was back in 2011 from some giant lipid group. It's escaping me the exact name. Their global consensus was, brain disorders from long chain omega-3 deficiencies will be the biggest challenge to the future of humanity. I mean, again, going back to the lipid-based food policy, we don't have one. So if the brain is a supercomputer made out of fat, and it is, two of the best scientists in the area, Michael Lewis, who's a colonel, retired Michael Lewis from the Pentagon, West Point grad, Army Ranger, MD, MPH, MBA, and Captain Joe Hiblin, MD, psychiatrist. They published a paper in 2011 looking at military suicide and omega-3 blood status.
Wow.
That's when we first started seeing there was a trend here, right? Correlation is not always causation. But listen to this, 2011, Journal of Psychiatry, losing more soldiers to suicide than the theater of war. They had 800 controls matched for age, rank, and sex, and they had blood of all these soldiers that had committed suicide in a big freezer from the Army. They tested the blood. They were at a 62% increased risk of suicide in the lowest quartile of omega-3. The lowest amount correlated to a 62% increase in suicide. So why did they publish on suicide? I asked the psychiatrist on the paper. He said, Stuart, suicide is the end of depression and anxiety. It's the end. I wanted to get people's attention here, okay? So then, just this last year, the Journal of Aggressive and Violent Behavior, that's a fun late night read. They did a study, a meta-analysis of multiple randomized controlled trials. There was only 4,000 patients total in it. So you need to take the data with a grain of salt. But it was very persuasive. It said there's now ample evidence to recommend omega-3, whether it's in the school, whether it's in the clinic, whether it's in the criminal justice system. So they were finding that a 30% reduction in aggression with omega-3s, especially when we get the right level in the tissue, which is the issue. And it said it's a safe, cheap, and effective way to deal with aggressive and violent behavior. So in summary, the brain is a supercomputer made out of fat. And you're right, if your brain is on fire, because you've got way too much omega-6, not enough omega-3. That's only part of it. Let's say you've got leaky gut and leaky brain, and you've got all kinds of stealth infections going up in the brain, right? And you've got too much omega-6 and not enough omega-3. Can that be leading to some of the neuropsychiatric disorders? Can that be some of what's going on with people's behavior? That's what some of these scientists are suggesting, and I think it's worth taking a look at it.
Thank you. Well, we're going to take a break and play our natural medicine chest. When we come back, we'll talk more about specific mental health challenges linked to omega-3, foods rich in omega-3, other things, or also how do we improve absorption of omega-3? Because quite frankly, some people burp up fish oils and just can't tolerate them. Maybe they have gallbladder problems or something else. So maybe there's some solutions that our wonderful guest, Stuart Tomc, can talk about. So stay with us, folks, right here on The Natural Nurse and Dr. Z.
On this edition of the Natural Medicine Chest, we'll discuss jojoba, the miracle plant of the desert.
Jojoba is spelled Jojoba, but is pronounced according to its Spanish origins. The jojoba plant grows in the American Southwest and the Sonoran Desert in Mexico. The jojoba is a large bush-like plant resembling mistletoe. It can reach a height of 15 feet and can live from 100 to 200 years. The Sonoran Indians have used the oil pressed from the jojoba beans for centuries. Father Juniper Serra, founder of 21 missions in California, noted in the early 1700s that the local Indians were using jojoba oil for treating sores, cuts, bruises, burns, and as a diet supplement, to soothe skin from sun and wind burns, as a cooking oil, and even as a beverage.
The importance of jojoba as a cash crop was proclaimed in 1935. But it was not until 1974, when the killing of sperm whales was banned, that the government began to study jojoba oil in depth as a substitute for whale oil. The National Academy of Sciences concluded jojoba oil has a radically different chemical structure than any other known oil. Most oils break down or turn rancid. Jojoba, on the other hand, is hypoallergenic, non-toxic, never turns rancid, and does not break down even under high temperature and pressure.
The University of California at Riverside did a study where they cooked 27 batches of popcorn in the same heated jojoba oil. The last batch was just as perfect as the first. These unusual properties are unique to jojoba oil because, chemically speaking, jojoba oil is not really an oil at all, but is a liquid wax. Its composition is almost identical to sebum, which is the oil secreted by human sebaceous glands to help to protect the skin from the environment.
Jojoba has a myriad of usages. The cosmetic industry takes advantage of its compatibility to human skin by adding it to shampoos, conditioners, moisturizers, and many other cosmetic products. In medicine, jojoba can be used directly on rashes, cuts, and psoriasis. It may also be used as a lubricant for artificial hearts. Jojoba contains a natural appetite suppressant, which can be used in weight loss products. It has no known side effects. In industry, jojoba is known to be a superior engine lubricant and will cause a car to run 20 to 30 degrees cooler when added to the crankcase oil.
So, if you are interested in a miracle plant from the desert, reach for jojoba in your natural medicine chest.
Wow, that was a great addition to our discussion on fats, oils, and waxes here. And thank you for rejoining us right here on The Natural Nurse and Dr. Z. And we have Stuart Tomc on, who is a distinguished health educator, certified natural health professional, and lots of experience as a global educator and ambassador for Nordic Naturals, and having extensive knowledge on fats. It's so great to have a great expert and have a deep, excellent discussion on fats. Great. So fats are not malign. I think the take-home message, what was the take-home messages of the first half hour, Stuart?
I think the big take-home message is It's all about the balance of fats, and that the tissue is the issue. Whatever ends up in you, especially in your red blood cell, that's what matters. I think we focus too much on dietary intakes for years. Is this brand better? Is this source better? I think what we've learned is that the biomarker, that's what we're going for. I think that's the big takeaway message.
So let's talk about that because, you know, at one of the foundations of naturopathic thinking is that this was put down by Lust, who is the founder of naturopathic medicine. He brought it from Germany, but he would always say you have to build up the blood and then move it. So what does building the blood meant? That means kind of building the blood with the proper amount of fats, oils, nutrients, minerals, amino acids, and other imponderables such as love and chi and things like that, and then moving them to your cells so that the cells can take up this good thing and then get rid of the garbage through the lymphatic system, and using the intelligence of the body, the vis that we talk about in naturopathic medicine, that the body has the power to heal itself. It kind of knows what to do. However, the body's also like MacGyver. They will, MacGyver was a great show. If you don't know, if we have younger listeners out there, he would get out of a jam. He was like a secret agent guy. He would get out of a jam with a paperclip. He'd be able to anything he found around, he would MacGyver his way out of a jam. And the body kind of uses what it has. Now, if that's bad oils, the body will build a house of cards sort of out of the bad oils, but that leads to ill health. That was another big message I think that we talked about.
Yes, and even though the body finds a way to enzymatically excrete oxidized oils to make them more water-like and less lipid-like to excrete them, the cell membrane doesn't care what's there.
Mm-hmm.
And if there is an absence of these critical omega-3 fatty acids, by default, that cell membrane is only a fraction of what it can be. When you're talking about cellular health, and we are building a better body as we correct the omega-3, omega-6 imbalance. What do I mean by that? Go ahead, Doc.
I was just going to say, I had a really interesting patient that had both eczema and asthma, that over time, by changing their omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, they were able to come off of all their medication. Now, it didn't happen overnight because it takes a while for this to happen. So what's this scenario? Someone comes in and they take a test and they're woefully inadequate. In other words, they're nice people. They're not inadequate, but their omega-3 to 6 ratio is off. So how long does it take to reconstruct the body on a holistic plan of taking oils or changing or adding omega-3s into your diet and maybe decreasing the 6s? How do we go about doing this clinically?
Well, it does take 120 days. This is known science, pretty much for all the red blood cells to turn over. And when you mention chi, right, if you have some stagnant blood in certain parts of your body, that might take a little bit longer. I love what you said, right? Even TCM said one cause of disease, congestion, one cure, circulation. Right. So this really, really lays into that. It takes 120 days because that's how long it takes the red blood cells to turn over. That was my analogy of a hostile environment. If you are making cells every day, and we do red blood cells, and your environment is inflammatory, those red blood cells are being kind of born into that environment. So that's why we call this the most modifiable risk factor. We're finding out there are some rate limiting factors, to use some chemistry terms, that omega-3 isn't delivering in the clinical trials the way we had expected it to. And that you might have made this observation that eating fish appears to have been paying the biggest dividend, more than eating fish oil. But the problem with eating fish is we can't eat enough fish today because of all the dioxins, PCBs, micro retardants, fire, retardants, microplastics. So that's where I think supplementation does make more sense. I've also made the observation that commercial fish oil is using the wrong antioxidants. Read any fish oil label. You're going to see rosemary and vitamin E. Have you noticed that? They always put vitamin E in the omega-3 to stabilize it in the bottle. What we've learned is that if you don't have the right antioxidants in with the omega-3, then it could be unstable in the body. And what I'm talking about are the fluorotannins that were in the marine web in algae. In algae, because you called it at the beginning with the grass, with the animals that eat the grass.
And
the
algae, you brought up algae, which is a great, really important suggestion because the phytoplankton really are how eventually down the food chain that the salmon and other fish that are high in omega-3s, that's where they get it because
you're totally right.
They eat other fish and et cetera, et cetera.
And bioaccumulate it. And what we've learned is if it starts in the algae has polyphenolic antioxidants on the outside, lipophilic, and then fatty acids in the middle, in the algae. Then the plankton eat the algae, the small fish eat the plankton, you said this, and bioaccumulate, you're right, the omega-3s. Then the whales eat the small fish, and the Inuit ate the whale blubber. So when we analyzed the whale blubber, you know what we found out? I didn't know this until about 7-8 months ago. The whale blubber is loaded with polyphenols and omega-3s. And they ate those together. The Inuit had more omega-3 than omega-6. They had nosebleeds. Their blood was thinner.
Yeah, they had a lot of astaxanthin in there.
And fluorotannins.
One of the highest, has one of the highest ORAC, which we talked about on a couple of shows ago.
For scavenging free radicals. Also, those fluorotannins, the polyphenols in the algae, check this out, also turn on the genetic machinery for the body to make vitamin C, which is why the Inuit didn't have scurvy. So when we thought that the Inuit diet was just omega-3, the missing link, the small important missing piece were the polyphenols. So I've now seen if we can combine polyphenols with high polyphenolic rich extra virgin olive oil and omega-3s together. I'm calling that like a Mediterranean diet in a bottle. I'm trying to find ways for people to increase the omega-3 index without having to eat 3 cans of sardines a day.
That's a good question about that. I wanted to bring that up that we kind of glazed over a little bit. So it gets back to that prostaglandin sequence of events. So you eat the fat, and then there's an enzyme that they call, delta 5 and delta 6 desaturase. Now, these enzymes allow you to take the oils and then make them into the anti or pro-inflammatory substances. But certain people genetically, as I remember from my training, those enzymes aren't working as well, and you can kind of modify them with certain nutrients like zinc and magnesium and some other micronutrients that kind of help you get these. But for instance, like a vegan who's not going to have the EPA from the fish, if they rely on omega-3s from walnuts, for instance, or pecans, maybe algae, I'm not sure, they still have a rough time making it into the EPA. Can you talk a little bit about that and what's your knowledge on that, Stuart?
Oh, no, you're making such an excellent point. So when we talk about omega-3, there's several types of omega-3s. And when we talk about omega-6, there's several types of omega-6. And to make it simple, we call it short chain and long chain. So just think on land, the short chain. So short chain omega-6 in grains, seeds, and seed oils. And the short chain omega-3s come from green leafy vegetables, grass, algae. Those are the short chain. And what Dr. Z is saying is when a human eats short chain omega-3 or short chain omega-6, that the human has to desaturate and elongate. This is a very complicated process where the fat ends up getting converted into what we call its bioactive form. It needs to have more of these carbons that get added more of these double bonds for it to be bioactive. What does that mean? The bioactive lipids make these hormone-like compounds. So the reason we call the short chain ones essential fatty acids, your body doesn't make the short chain ones, but it then needs to desaturate and elongate them into the bioactive lipids. So what's the answer? The answer is to either eat fish or fish oil, or now algae has EPA and DHA in it. And then on the omega-6 side, we're eating more than enough omega-6 in our diet. That's where I think, Dr. Z, the focus really needs to be. For a long time, we thought just decreasing omega-6 would increase your omega-3 levels. Now we found out that's almost never the case. And then to drill down on what you said about genetics, this is a huge point. I mentioned it earlier, but I should say it again. Some of us convert these seeds and seed oils very quickly into the bioactive pro-inflammatory omega-6, arachidonic acid.
Like the Celts. I'm part Celt, part
Right,
Irish.
you have the genetic predisposition,
Unfortunately, yeah.
right? So that means that Dr. Z doesn't respond exactly the same way to French fries as, say, his guest, me, Stuart, right? If I'm a slower converter, the French fries aren't quite as detrimental to me. And that's why I love the functional testing. For too many years, Dr. Z, we were arguing about, is flax better than cod, better than krill, better than green lip mussel? Then we were arguing about the ratio in the bottle. What we now know is 3 parts omega-6 in the blood to 1 part omega-3. That's called the safe zone. 3-to-1, 2-to-1, or 1-to-1.
So repeat that again. That's important, I think. Yeah.
So 3 parts omega-6 to 1 part omega-3 as measured in the red blood cell is called the safe zone.
I see.
Anything over 3-to-1 is considered the danger zone. So that's why we call this the most modifiable risk factor when you think of the other modifiable risk factors: quitting smoking, quitting drinking, and exercising. Getting your omega-6-3 ratio, and whether you have to eat the cans of sardines every day, whether you have to take enough omega-3 to do it every single day, the future of this conversation, I think, will be driven by artificial intelligence. You're going to have a Dr. Z assistant on your phone that's going to say your omega-6-3 levels are off, eat more cold water oily fish, or take more supplements. Your vitamin D is off. You're below 125 nanograms per deciliter. Get more vitamin D or get more sun. Your A1C, now let's segue into poor metabolism. Your A1C is too high. Take some more prebiotic fiber, do more push-ups, eat fewer donuts. I believe it's all going to be driven by these biomarkers. So we're going to be able to help people figure out, for example, that might burp up fish oil or don't metabolize lipids well, that they've got dysbiosis in the gut. That
You know, they could have gallbladder problems too.
Oh, for sure. But that would make all lipids, right? All
Yeah.
fat would be, but specifically
Yeah.
with fish oil, how many people are you seeing that have all kinds of dysbiosis in their gut because they don't eat enough prebiotic fibers and they've got an inhospitable environment in the gut? Don't you see that all the time with patients?
Yeah, very much so. And I like to add lecithin to their oils to help them emulsify it, because I know, so when you take oils in your body, it has to go through the digestive system and then get eventually assimilated into your cells.
Exactly. That's why I'm calling out the gut bacteria. So you're right. Lecithin might be a very good way to help, but also the prebiotic fibers that are helping to create the right environment between the negative and the positive bacteria. The prebiotic fibers, not the probiotics, but the prebiotic fibers that would ferment. We're thinking like resistant starch from corn and potatoes and bananas, inulin from chicory, gargum, maybe some beta glucans and a little bit of psyllium, all these prebiotic fibers to shift you from proteolytic to saccharolytic bacteria. We're seeing so many people that have such bad leaky gut that they don't respond as well to the oil intervention or even eating fish. as they should, because that gut microbiome is so far out of balance. So we like prebiotic fibers for that. And we've made that observation. A lot of people have horrible dysbiosis. Primary dysbiosis is caused primarily from a reduction in hydrochloric acid as we age, right? A lot of raw food people, you always see these recalls. It's broccoli, right, at Costco that could be causing listeria, right? A lot of raw foods. And then all the antibiotics that we've been on and antifungals that we've been on really destroy the gut. And if we don't get the right prebiotic fiber, you can throw all the probiotics you want in there. That's a hostile environment as well. So we like balancing the cell membrane fluidity and then balancing the ratio of bacteria in the gut, positive and negative bacteria. We find doing those two things together actually increases compliance. People get better results, and because of the gut-brain axis, right? They're even seeing more global anti-inflammatory results.
Yeah. I mean, it takes a little time with oils. I know, but as a transition thing, we use botanicals and other means to help people with their inflammation, and then eventually, a lot of times, like in my case with the asthma and eczema, the oils, and now I was just listening last night. I was watching a show, and their new drug for eczema that targets the downstream inflammatory cytokines, but doesn't address the root cause, which is the imbalance of the omega-3 to 6. So, yeah, that drug will clear your skin, but it suppresses very important biochemicals that might cause life-threatening side effects. You're not going to get too many life-threatening side effects by using omega-3s or eating more walnuts. By the way, what are some, you mentioned seeds have the omega-6s, and some of the other nuts and other things have omega-3s. What are the better nuts to consume? I like walnuts and pecans. I mean, they're one of my favorites. I just got to watch them because they put the weight on my kapha body.
Well, my professor had a list that you'd love. I'll make sure to email it to you so you can
great.
share it with everybody. It's called the Nix the 6 and Eat the 3 list.
Ooh, nice.
So he won a Lifetime Achievement Award, $50,000, and then took every food in the U.S. Department of Agriculture's database. This is before we had the blood test. And so you would take the positive numbers, which are high omega-3, and the negative numbers that are high omega-6. You take a little highlighter, and you'd highlight all the foods that you're eating. And that way you could actually look at the list and find out what's actually on the list. Well, all of the high omega-3 foods, all of them are all fish.
Wow.
All of them. The high omega-6 foods, I was just pulling up the list so that I wasn't going
Mostly
from memory here.
corn-based. I know, corn and grain-based, right?
Well, here are the top omega-6 foods of all time. This is just based on the math of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's database. Safflower oil, that's a negative 84, loaded with omega-6. Grapeseed oil,
Wow.
sunflower oil, poppy seed oil, salad dressing, mayonnaise, soybean, and safflower oil, sunflower seed kernel toasted without salt, oil, corn, industrial, and retail all-purpose salad. So you look at all of them, it's pretty much
Yeah, a lot of the dressings that people are, and then when they don't make it from scratch, which you should do.
they're all loaded with omega-6s, and it's truly the deficiency in omega-3. That, I think, is the takeaway message. In 2025, we've learned there's no way to reduce your omega-6 enough to increase your omega-3. This is a great takeaway message. So instead of beating up on all the seed oils, let's eat more sardines or take more high-quality omega-3 products. I've recently learned that if the omega-3s are mixed with olive oil, high polyphenolic-rich olive oil, that can increase secondary bioavailability, supported by 1.5 million blood spot tests. But what matters at the end of the day is that every one of your listeners eventually know their number. They know their balance between omega-6 and omega. There's one thing I can share today. You want to know the balance between omega-6, omega-3, and you've heard of the omega-3 index as well, correct, Dr. Oz? You've seen that one too?
I have seen that. Yeah.
Okay, so there's a couple that omega-6-3 balance is the AA-EPA ratio, and the omega-3 index is the percentage of EPA and DHA in the red blood cell. Both of those numbers, in my opinion, and the scientists that have trained me, those will be and are more predictive of your current or future health outcome than LDL, HDL, and triglycerides. That's a big statement. Here's why they're saying it. They've said if statins, which are the number one selling drug, if LDL cholesterol is the target, if saturated fat raises LDL, thank you, Ansel Keys, right? The 7-country study, and lowering LDL is going to lower heart disease, with statins being the number one selling drug of all time, why is it still the number one killer?
Well, yeah, we talked about that, that it's polyphenols and damaged other mechanisms of damage to the arteries, but but inflammation is the key. So where can folks reach you to get more information about maybe testing or understanding more of what we talked about here? We'll certainly make this recording will be made available on the website, Natural Nurse Dr. Z, and wherever it's playing. But anyway, so give us some information about how we can reach you.
Sure. You can follow what the team of scientists I'm working with and the testing that we're doing at Test Omega 3. That's the number 3, testomega3.com. And you'll see my bio, a little bit of information on me, and then the other scientists and doctors that I've joined forces with around the world. This is the biggest mission of our life. We want to become the biggest personalized nutrition company on earth. Imagine decentralizing all of this information, empowering everybody with the most important number that they don't know. And then finally, go to pubmed.gov, right, Dr. Z? We always ask people to do this. Go to pubmed.gov, do your own research. Research the omega-6-3 balance, the omega-3 index. Learn more about chronic silent inflammation and omega-6-3 ratios. I think both of those tools will pay you huge dividends.
Yeah, I'm excited to, certainly do more of this work with patients. I do quite a bit of it, but it's always nice to talk to an expert and kind of get a little bit of a recharge. It's like sort of taking a vacation and taking this information and running with it to help as many people as possible. So any last comment? We're about out of time. We got about a minute left in the program. So leave us with some good positive thinking, Stuart, and some good thought.
So I want everybody to ask themselves, are you in the safe zone or are you in the danger zone? Do you want to know? Are you in the safe zone or the danger zone? Do you want a solution? Because if you take these tests and you find out where you're at, you've got to then embrace the fact that you want a solution. And so I hope that you can appreciate that what we shared today, right, our companies, and Zeno means a small piece with great value. So I hope I shared a very small piece with great value. You know your subject very well, Dr. Z. It's an honor to be on your show, and thank you for letting me share today.
Thank you so much. Well, our guest was Stuart Tomc, T-O-M-C, and our subject was, of course, a deep dive into the omega-3 oils, and we're so excited to have him on, and we want to wish you folks great health, happiness, longevity, and until next time, we wish you to stay healthy and live long and prosper, like Spock says. Anyway, take good care and see you till next time. Bye-bye.